Greetings everyone, welcome to Code with Srini. In this lecture, we will look into creating an email password-based authentication for your application using Firebase. Okay, in my previous lectures, you might have noticed that I've already created a Angular Firebase authentication. So to begin with, first we need to go to the authentication. In here, we have sign-in method, right? So we need to check on the sign-in method and we need to enable email and password combination. So the provider should be email password, and you can check on any other providers if you may wish. But for now, for this part of the lecture, we will just use the email password. And then let's go ahead and set up our application now. So to do that, we'll go to ng new Firebase auth. That'll be our application name. And yes, we need to add Angular routing and should be SCSS, even though we're not going to work more on a styling part. It'll be purely the login and authentication or registering a user part. Okay, we're not going to focus on validating the user, or we're not going to get more in-depth into styling our templates or forms. All right, so once our application has been set up, we need to install Firebase into our Angular application. So it'll be, before that I need to travel into the Firebase auth directory, and then in there let me just go and do a quick ls and see if the application is set up. Okay, and let me clear that up. Now we need to install the Firebase modules into our application. So it'll be npm install and save Firebase as well as @Angular Fire. So we need to install these two packages, Firebase packages, into our application. So that will put the save will put an entry into the package JSON. All right, we have installed Firebase and Angular Fire. Now we need one more thing to get through, which is npm install save Bootstrap. Okay, I've set up the Bootstrap as well as started up the application. So we have something running here, but I cleared all the app component HTML. We'll be building pretty much soon. But before that, once I install Bootstrap, I have included that in my style SCSS as @import, and we are using the Bootstrap min CSS from the distribution, right? So once that's done, we'll close it up, and to check that out, we can just write it as, let's say, h3 Firebase email app. Okay, so let's just be there, right? I think it should be inside a container. So div.container. I'm just going to wrap everything inside this div. So yes, it looks pretty neat. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we'll just go and open up the app module TS. Now in the app module TS, we need to add few things to include Firebase in our application. So after the app routing module, what we're going to do is Angular Fire module dot initialize app, and in here we need to set our environment dot Firebase. Okay, right, so both these things have red squiggly lines, which means we need to declare it somewhere. So it should be, and right, we need to add the Angular Fire. Okay, let's go ahead and add few more modules like Angular Fire auth module, and finally Angular Fire store module. So we need these three modules to be included in our app module. So it will be import, I'm going to copy paste Angular Fire module from Angular/Fire. I'm going to copy this and use the Angular Fire auth module as well. My bad, spell check. And yeah, Angular Fire auth module should be down here, and it's been included from Angular/Fire/auth. and again Angular Fire module to include our Firestore. Let me see if that comes up. Yes, it comes up. Yeah. Okay, so what happened? Is there any error thrown up? Nope, works beautifully fine. So we have imported, we just clean that up. We have imported Angular Fire module, which is the main module, which will also take up the parameters of Firebase from our environment, and Angular Fire Auth module. Again, we use this module for authenticating, and Angular Firestore module, which we'll be covering in the later part of this tutorial, wherein we will store some information about the user to a cloud store. So that's pretty much it about the app module TS. I'm going to close this app module. We don't need this anymore, and we proceed with the later part of the application, right? And now what we'll do is we need to create two components. Actually, we need to create three components: home, login, and registration. All right, so once we have our integrated terminal open, I'm going to see if that we can enlarge the screen. I hope you can see it. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create ngGC, a component for registration, which will be inside an auth directory. The reason is, when you're building an application, if you're building it by module wise, like auth as a separate module, it'll be easier when your application grows larger and complex. Okay, and ngGC auth login. So it has been a practice for me to include all the authentication related elements inside an auth directory. So it'll be, everything is wrapped inside this directory over there. And now we're going to create home component. So we got home, and we also need to create ngGS auth/auth, which will be our service TypeScript file. So the registration component and all the three components will communicate with the service file, which is the auth service. So where it'll be here. Okay, the auth service resides inside an auth directory, and then the login as well as the registration part. So all these three elements, which depends purely on the authentication part, will be inside an auth directory. All right, so too much explanation. Let's jump into the application. Right, so I think we don't need this anymore. I'm going to close that up. Okay, next thing is app routing module. We need to define few routes here. So that could be constant routes with an empty array as of now. So I'm going to just open up a path with login and component. It should be a login component, so it's automatically added. And again, the last bit should be a redirect path. So a path with no URL should redirect to a home page. So we need to path match as a full, and that should be done. Yeah, home works. So if you have an empty URL, it redirects to home, and likewise, right? Okay, what shall we build first? Shall we start with the home page, or what I'm going to do is, let's leave the home page as it is. Now we got the routing part. Remember that we are just going to focus only on the Firebase communication, authenticating with the Firebase. We're not going to use a auth guard or any other fancy things for now. So just skip that part, and we'll close this up. Right, yeah, we'll do one thing. We'll just go ahead and create a registration component first, so that we can create a user first, and then we can see who is logged in homepage. In the registration part, let's clear that up and start with div class of row, div columns of call 12, not columns, call 12 registration. All right, I'll just call it as user registration. Okay, so what are we going to do? Register. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll open up a inspect element to see if there is any error catching up here. Margin top of 3, so that should do. We're gonna build a form. I'll just going to do a fast forward of building a form, and then explain it to you later. All right, so if you look further, we got an error. That's because in the app module I made a stupid thing without adding a form module. So it should be somewhere down here. All right, we just included the forms module to get rid of that error, so we forgot. So I got this registration component HTML, which pretty much is a simple form with first name, last name, and email, password. So we're going to make use of these fields, like all these 4 fields. We're not going to do a validation of the confirmation password or things like that. Okay, so you can do, you need to do this in your application, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to touch this subject, right? If you notice, I have an alert wrapper which will throw up any sort of authentication error. Okay, so the Firebase will throw an error object, which is a JSON object, which pretty much means it will send it as a JSON object called code with some error code, and then a message with the detailed description of what error message that is. Okay, so we'll catch up the error over here. Then our form is a user registration form with a template variable assigned to ng form, and while you submit it, it will call up create user with that user reg form. Okay, no validation whatsoever I have done here, so please pardon me. The validation part, I can do a separate video on doing a validation. And finally, I have a submit button. Once you click on this submit, it will call up the create user, right? So for that, we'll open up the registration component. The registration component TS must have, the first thing first, must have a create user, and it should be a form, and then we will pass that info to the service. Okay, so for that we need to declare, right? So it should be private auth and auth service. Once that's done, it's included, and then this .auth .create user and form .value. Okay, so what this will do is call up the create user method from the auth service, and then all the magic happens there. So we need to, the next thing is, before we move on, we can also do auth error of any. So this auth error will be binding to this one. So we are creating a field in a class called auth error, and we will have an ng on init. So in this we will have, hold on a second, we'll just hold up right there, because we need to subscribe to an observable. Once that observable emits an error or emits some data, we need to catch that using auth error and then throw that up to the template. Okay, so we'll just hold on right there and create a create user method for now. Okay, so let's go on to the auth service and create things we need. Okay, so in the constructor for now, we can declare private af auth as Angular Fire Auth. Okay, so that's the most important thing we need. We need to save few information in the DB as well, Firebase DB. So we will declare that should be a DB and Angular Firestore. That will be our DB. Okay, and finally a router, which is again a router. So we will navigate, if the user login is successful, we will navigate to the home page. Registration is successful, we'll navigate to the home page. That's the only thing we have. Okay, so constructor definitions are done. Next thing is, let's go ahead and create a user. Right, so create user, and create user, the form value contains all the user information, so I'm just calling it as user. And then this .af auth will be our method an object will be calling up, and if you click IntelliSense, will come up with a create user with email and password. So it will accept email string and password. I'm gonna just show that again. So create email and password, so it will accept email and password as a string. So we'll go with that. Just close it. and yes, user dot email and user dot password. So we got two information as of now. So this will, the create user email will return a promise for us. So we need to catch the promise. So if it is, then we'll get the user credentials. So which means if a user is created and the user information is logged in, as well as it will send back the user information such as user ID or some more information. I will console that up and show you up. Basically we need user ID. Okay, so credential and open up a code block. So first thing, we need a field in a class called new user. So that should be any. This dot new user equals user. Okay, so we are assigning this user to a new user information, right, making it publicly available to the other methods that we are going to create now. Okay, so the next thing is user credential dot user dot update profile. Okay, so what's that update profile is all about? You can set up a display name. So when you create a email-based email-based authentication, your display name will not be there. So we need to set the display name. Okay, so apart from display name, you can also set a photo URL. You can do this anytime, any part of the process. It's not necessary that you need to do this during the create user flow. It's up to you, but for me, I think it's best to do this while you're creating a username. Okay, so the update profile will take up a JSON object, which will be a display name. I thought for now, first name and last name will work just for now. Okay, so first name, last name as a display name, right? So that will do. Now next bit is we need to insert this information, okay, to a DB. So apart from username and apart from first name, last name and user ID, we also need to store some other information like role of a user, what sort of a role he's in, or age, or anything else. Okay, anything, right? So we need to store those kind of miscellaneous information during the registration process. To do that, I'm going to create a insert record statement like insert user data method, and it should be taking up user credentials, which is a Firebase dot auth dot user credential interface. Okay, so this user credential will matching up with this one. Okay, we are going to send only the user credential part, right? So it will contain let me do a console so that you get a clear idea what's that user credential is all about. Okay, so user credential, that is done. Okay, in the insert user, we're going to insert a record in FireDB store. So I'm going to open this up and keep it open up here, so you can see a database collections documents. Okay, so at present there is nothing in the insert user database. We need to add a few more things like just start with the return statement and this db.doc. Okay, we're going to create a new document, and the new document will have a path of users, and then we're going to use user credential dot user dot UID. So that will be the one that we will make use of. That's a unique identification, and that will be kind of a primary key for this collections that which will be adding up here. Okay, so it's user credential user ID, and set that. Okay, open up, and we add all the document related information like email, this dot new user dot email, and first name, this dot new user dot first name, last name, this dot new user dot last name. And just for the sake of adding extra bits of information. I'll just call it as network user. Right, so along with this, what I'm going to do is, yeah, we need to add this dot insert user data and user credentials. It should go to a then statement which will tell us if that's inserted. We need to use catch as well, so for now we don't need to worry much about that. Okay, once the data is set, we need to send the user to a home page. Okay, and /home. Right, so this is the end game. So this is the end point where the create user stops. Okay, so this bit is a then statement, which means if everything is successful, it will go through this flow, update the profile and insert the user, and everything is successful. What if the certain things are wrong, like there is a weak password, or email is not valid, or if the email is already available? For that, we need to use catch. We need to emit this error somehow. So for that, let's go ahead and create a subject behavior concept here, which is purely an RxJS area. Okay, but that's how we need to think of Angular. Angular is purely a reactive programming. So for reactive programming, we need to use more of a reactive approach. For that purpose, I'm going to create something called behavior subject, such as event auth error equals new behavior subject. So when you create a behavior subject, your behavior should be, it should have a value set. This is called as a source. Okay, so it's set as an empty string, and event auth, this should be private and this should be public. Only then the emit will happen. Okay, and it should be error and observable. Okay, and observable should have a $sign. I mean, it's a naming convention. It's not a hard and fast rule that it should have a dollar at the end of a variable name. Event auth error, so that's the behavior subject, and as observable. So we're making this as an observable so that we can emit and subscribe that in the later section of your application. Right, so we anticipate that in the catch there will be some sort of an error. Okay, so what we're going to do is we will emit that information here. Okay, so this dot event auth error dot next, we are just passing the error object. Okay, that's done, and so far there were no errors, and even in the console terminal everything looks beautiful. Once we have created our methods, we can go ahead and test our application. But before that, we have created an observable and a behavior subject. So we have used it in the catch statement. We need to make use of this auth error, okay, inside the registration component. So that should be this dot auth dot event auth error dot subscribe. We're basically subscribing it to an observable. Okay, and data, we just simply assign this to auth error. Hopefully no error, so this should work. So Tony Stark, email as Tony Stark at just leave it as Tony Stark. Okay, Tony Stark at test.com. Password is some just random password. Oh, it just works. So when we refresh that, you can see Tony Stark at test.com. Right, so we'll do one more thing. We'll create another user, Steve Rogers, and Steve just test12. The email address is badly formatted, so this comes because of the event auth error, and we used a catch statement over here. So this is the primary reason that that we can able to catch the error. Okay, so this is pretty much done, and let's create Steve Rogers, Steve at test.com, and test123 will be our password, and I'll just submit it, and then it should, what you see here is the user credentials that we have been talking about earlier. So this is that user credential, and inside that we can access the user information, and if you drill deep down you can see user ID, which will be the ID that you can if you can see, is D6L. We can match this up to the user ID over here. So steve@test.com, and that's the user ID. And more information will be available in a DB. Yep, we got the users as the collection, and we got 2 documents that says the users that we created. So email, first name, last name, and same for the Steve Rogers network user. Okay, our registration part is successful. Now we need to build a login part. For that, we need to do a little bit of work in the home page. All right, before that, we'll also add a logout method for convenience, right? It should be logout and return this .af auth.signout. So that's done, and let's go to the home page component and do some work over there. I'm gonna throw up a little bit of information about the logged in user. So it'll be with a ng if user is logged in, so logged in as user logged in, and we need to display name, so user display name, right? So only if the user is logged in and the user data is available. We'll be covering that up in a bit, and I'm going to add few buttons, which will be a registration button, logout button, and login button. Okay, so these are all based on a condition if the user is available, or if the user is not available, we're going to give up a registration and login button. If the user is logged in, obviously it will be a logout. So instantly you will see the change in here. We register and login. All right, I'm going to create something called login. So when you click on the login button, that should go up to a router. Okay, so in the constructor it should be private auth service and router, right? Router. Okay, and we have this router navigate. We're going to navigate to a login page. Okay, so that's done, and a logout. Logout will simply logs you out of the system, right? No, I just don't need anything. It'll be just this auth.logout, right? So that will call up the logout method, and same way we need to have a registration, a register. So that will move to a register page. We've been using up the user, right? So we need to create a field in a class called user, which will be a Firebase of user interface, right? Okay, so we're going to bind some information to the user through Firebase, through Auth Service. So this .get users. Oh, okay. We don't have a get user. So what I'm going to do is create a get user. So just up there, get user state. So I'm going to return this .if auth state. So this will contain all the information about the currently logged in user. It should be get user state, and what is it? It's an observable, so we need to subscribe to it, and we get user information. Obviously this user equals user. So that's done. We already logged in, so we need to log out of the system. Log out, and we are presented with register and login. Okay, so register will take you to the registration page, and login, nothing's there. Okay, so let's build a login page. Okay, login works. I'm gonna get rid of this. I already have a template for login component, so I'm gonna just copy paste it over here, and you can make use of it. Okay, so it's pretty much same like the registration form. In fact, they both are same form. Change the template variable and ng submit for the login and login form. Okay, let's look at the login form template, and it looks like this. So we're gonna focus on login component ts, wherein we need to hook this login button and bind that to a service. So that should be login form this auth. Okay, we don't have an auth, we need to create one. Private auth service dot login. We need to supply the value, just the value, email, and form dot value dot password. Okay, the error that we get is a squiggly lines for the login, which obviously does not exist. And let's go to the Auth Service and create a login method. Okay, so just after the get user state, I'm going to create a login email string, password string, and this if auth sign in. So this time we're going to sign in with email and password, so that should be email and password. Similar to create a user with email and password, we can catch if there is any exception thrown, and we can also process if there is a successful login. Okay, so the error, obviously, like the same thing that we have seen for the registration method, we are going to pass that into an event of error. Okay, and next of error. So this thing right, we need to bind it to login component ts ng on in it, so we can capture that and we can display an error if there is any. The next bit is then user credentials, and if user credential, we will just do a router.navigate and home. Okay, so if there is a successful login, we will navigate them to your home page, else we'll just throw up an error. So we need to complete this error part to make it work in the login component. How does it work? We need to check we already have something called auth error in our login component. If you notice, we have something called auth error that will display a message, right? So auth error of any, and in the onInit function, onInit cycle, this auth event auth error, which is an observable, and we need to subscribe to an observable and pass that data into a code block. Now this auth error equals data. Okay, so I think pretty much we came to a conclusion, and looks like there are no errors thrown up and it should be working quite well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a round of testing. So first, bad email. Okay, email form address is badly formatted. The next is steve@test.com with a wrong password. Password is invalid, or the user does not have a password. That's a good thing. Now test 1 2 3, I guess. Yeah, it works. So now we can log into Firebase with just using email and password. Of course, we need to register a user in Firebase system. You can also add a little bit of information about the user, like if you want to add a role or an admin or age or anything else. If you want to add, you can just add a document, and as a collection, you can add more fields about the user. Okay, it'll like a metadata of a user. This is pretty much how we can make use of Firebase and authentication, which will make your application really simple and seamless. Thank you for watching Code with Srini. Your comments are really valuable. I made this video based on your comment, so please do comment and share this video with your friends. Thank you.